Greetings, friends. So Russia is invading the Ukraine. It looks like Russia will take over pieces of the Ukraine. Will it take over the whole country? Maybe. It's doing this because Ukraine is very strategically important, and NATO wants to put missiles, or theoretically will put missiles, in Ukraine once Ukraine becomes part of NATO, which the United States has been pushing for, to make Ukraine an advancement in that American empire, or that globalist empire, whatever you want to call it, closer to the borders of Russia. Ukraine, which was known as Little Russia, which was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, and strategically important before that for centuries, located on the Black Sea. I mean, you can see how strategically this region was very important for sea trade into the Mediterranean. Britain and France fought Russia over the Crimea in the 1850s. So this has been going on for a long time. So they're saying Russia's the aggressor? Russia wants to neutralize Ukraine so it can't have missiles right on their doorstep the way that the US had to neutralize the Soviet threat of those missiles in Cuba in that crisis in the 60s. It's the same idea. So it's obviously more complicated than that. There's plenty of evil people on both sides. Neither side is perfect. But it's kind of satisfying to see the Western media running circles in fumes over this. Ukraine has many Russian people who would want to identify with Russia, and it would have many people that don't. So it's a sad, tense situation. We're not sure what exactly has gone on because of the fog of war, but the Russians have advanced very far into the country. There's been shelling and shooting in Kiev, the main city, which would, that's like the center of the country. So clearly the Russian army is going to take a victory here. There's reports that the Russians have lost over 1,000 soldiers, or even I heard 3,000. Whereas the Ukrainians say only a few hundred casualties on their side. Maybe that's the case. I mean, we'll have to wait a few weeks or a few months to really know what's gone on. But I'm a little suspicious because, first of all, you can't really trust the media, especially the Western media, but you can't really trust either side, what they're saying right now. I mean, I suppose the Russians could be losing a lot of soldiers as they storm ahead into the country, but that's also a case where Ukraine is clearly losing, but the Russians are losing a lot of soldiers. I mean, maybe that could be happening, but it does raise my eyebrows, because it's like, it's like, so you're taking all these casualties, but you're winning? I mean, yeah, that does happen, but it is cause to wonder, like, what's really going on here? Either way, this is a country of millions of people on both sides. The fact that there's such small levels of casualties is just another testament to how today they try to avoid a nuclear war. We live in a post-1945 world where you can't have this all-out war because it would just wipe out everything right away. And I guess there's always some small threat that could happen. But what tends to happen is this slow burn where the nation state is no longer involved in directing war, which in this case it is. Russia, I guess you could say, is a nation state. Kind of. More so than maybe America or Britain or any of those countries. But even that, it's sort of not the norm, because generally it's corporations, it's big money, and mercenary groups that they fund, or other sort of paramilitary organizations that fight in Africa, that fight in South America, that fight in Asia, that fight in the Middle East. And it's like this slow burn warfare, proxy wars, that just goes on and smolders and kills lots of people over a long amount of time, but never these like mass events like World War II, because that would just burn itself out right away. So it's this terrible slow burn, and maybe this is a bit more of a flare-up, but it's still in that, because you got to think, like, what kind of a war, like, can you imagine that happening? Can you imagine if Russia invaded the Ukraine? I mean, this wouldn't make sense because Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire, but can you imagine if, like, Russia invaded Italy or something like that, and there was resistance, of course, Well, maybe that's a bad example because let's just say another Slavic Eastern European country. They invaded and it wasn't part of Russian Empire and they were resisting. I mean, if this had been like World War II, there would be like thousands and thousands of casualties by this point. If like you're halfway into the country, there would be thousands and thousands and thousands of casualties. So what this points to is the increasing importance of like air combat and just this high technology, these like more special forces that knock out your infrastructure, knock out your capability to resist, where you're in a position where it's like obviously you're not just going to sacrifice like your whole regiment when a few missiles can just blow it to bits. You would retreat or surrender or do whatever, and that's sort of the situation we're in, where it's probably be replaced more and more by robotic technology. Which empire, the American Empire or the Russian Empire? I know the American Empire, like it's not the American people, but their empire is being co-opted. Is their empire standing for Christianity, or is the Russian Empire standing for Christianity? I mean, again, it's on a spectrum. Neither side is perfect. But what is the American Empire doing for Christianity? Like the wars in the Middle East, the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, how have the results played out in both of those cases? Terribly. But in a good sense, the Western liberal values, feminism, LGBT, changing your gender, all of that stuff, have been rejected. In Afghanistan, of course, where they've returned to like Islam or a form of Islam, and in Iraq, where it's rife with sectarian violence, like Western liberal values have been rejected. Although the Kurds do let their women fight, I guess some groups do that. That's kind of a liberal thing to let your women fight, but sometimes a conservative culture has to do that to survive, I guess. So that's just one asterisk. There, but yeah, in no sense like can we, not we, but the Western Anglo or American Empire claim moral superiority here. I mean, they throw their dissidents, or at least into, they lock down bank accounts, like they did that to Nick Fuentes. They've done that recently with some of the organizers in Ottawa, or even just common people who contributed to the protests in Ottawa. So that same sort of authoritarian attitude to crack down is present in Canada, in the United States, as it might be present in a country like Russia or China. There's no moral superiority at all that we can claim. And in fact, the Western media and the American influenced elite have been attacking the very demographic in their country which traditionally supports wars. The white, so-called conservative people, often in the South or in Middle America, would have supported largely the invasion of Iraq, the Afghanistan conflict. Now, like even waving the American flag is a symbol of white supremacy and imperialism in the eyes of these elites and their university ideologues. Well, good luck drawing on those people to now support any war against Russia, which they can't support. They can't, because as we see, Biden is not doing anything. He's declaring sanctions, but there were already sanctions on Russia for a while. So he's trying to save face as best he can. What we're seeing is that the American empire is falling because they lost Afghanistan. It was a disaster. And Iraq, as we've seen, is rife with sectarian violence. And also Russia did take the Crimea, I think over 10 years ago, which was part of the Ukraine too. They reclaimed it. So what we're seeing is that the American empire, at least in the military sense, has been weakened, and we're seeing part of the edifice start to fall down now. Hasta luego, amigos.